Welcome back to Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV. Now, the International Criminal Court has terminated the cases against the Deputy President, William Ruto, and the journalist, Joshua Arap Sang. In his remarks, President Kenyatta talked about national healing and reconciliation as the next steps. And so on Cheche this morning, we're talking about what else excuse me, please, should happen. Our guests are Dr. Korir Singoe, legal advisor in the Office of the Deputy President, Stella Ndirangu, program manager for the International Cooperation at the International Commission of Jurists, the ICJ, and Wilfred Nderitu, representing the victims at the ICC. So, Ms. Ndirangu, you already pointed out that this court sets a bad precedent, that if people want to evade justice, they simply need to tamper with the trial, evidence, witnesses. But going forward, what should happen?
I think now, in the circumstances that we find ourselves, a lot of hope had been placed on the ICC and a lot of expectations. We forgot that we had a responsibility as a country also to deal with the post-election violence. And so for me, moving forward, I would want to see the government do much more than they have done.
In what sense? In
last year, in the State of the Nation address by the President, he actually set up a restorative fund for victims, a 10 billion fund.
10 billion shillings.
10 billion shillings fund. In last year's budget again, which in a few months we will be having a new budget, 3.4 billion of that 10 billion was set aside to deal with these issues. There has been no information about how that 3.4 billion has been used. I would want to know, money set aside for victims, what has been done with it? Because we are moving to a new budget year. There was no discussion about the victims in this year's State of the Nation address. Victims still need reparations, effective and meaningful reparations offered by the government. And that is a concern for me. I would want to know, it remains unaccounted for. We want to know what the 3.4 billion has been used for and what more funds will be set aside. And who actually is responsible to implement this 10 billion fund, because there's been a lot of lack of information around this issue.
Okay.
The second thing I want to say, there's been an obsession in this country with victimhood being associated with those who are displaced. Most of the government efforts have focused on the displacement in resettling victims, but the violations that victims experience are not only confined to displacement. We have victims who are sexually violated. They may have been displaced, but they were sexually violated. So when you give a victim land, is that an effective reparation? Is that what they really need? So we need a proper assessment of the victim needs, and we need that reparations implemented effectively and urgently.
Okay, you're agreeing with Ms. Ndirangu. Have you spoken to the victims yet, your clients?
Yes, I had spoken to a good sample of them before the decision, and one of the things that they raised was they hoped, first of all, that the decision would be carrying on the case to the defense phase. But with regard to
so your victims as a whole wanted the case to continue. You didn't have any scenario planning.
The vast majority of the victims wanted the case to proceed. There were some who, because of how long the process has taken, were not as enthusiastic about the case going on. But at the end of the day, every victim that I had occasion to speak to was clear about the need for reparations and also the need for assistance. Assistance particularly from the government, and this is because there has been assistance that has been provided over the last few years by the government, but it has not been provided in a transparent and equitable manner.
Okay.
As we speak, there have been the bulk of the recipients of this assistance in terms of numbers and in terms of the amount that has been given to the victims have been people from the Kikuyu community. We have victims of the post-election violence from the Kisii community, from the Luo community, even from the Kalenjin community. There are very, very many people who are yet to to benefit from this assistance, and this certainly is not acceptable. We have been having legislation on provision of assistance to internally displaced persons, but again, that is a statute that has been more in existence just in the statute books than in its implementation.
Okay, so for you going forward, it's really about compensation, information, and making sure that there's equitable access to compensation, but also an assessment of what people need and meeting those needs. That's what I'm hearing from both of you.
I think I would also want to say that assistance and reparations are not everything. Because we need to think about that journey that we started, which was supposed to be an inquiry into the truth. Where do we end? We end in a situation where we are saying that there has been witness interference. That does not speak very, very well about the truth process. And it is important that we seize the opportunity now that we are not just after an election, but we are before an election, to see how we can use these very unfortunate circumstances to reflect, have a time of national reflection, if you may, through a national convention and through a commission that will go to the root cause of the problems that give rise to the kind of violence that we had in 2007-2008.
I understand there is some fund set up by the ICC for those kind of reparations. Now that we don't know, I don't know, there have been issues raised whether these people have been acquitted or discharged, and what that means. So, at this point now, can Kenyan victims get any benefit from the fund from the ICC?
Yes, there is what we call the Trust Fund for Victims. The Trust Fund for Victims runs independently of the court. And to that extent, we would expect that it's going to make its own decision as what happens next. Now, as you correctly stated, this was not a conviction because, first of all, the process was not even going to end up in a conviction, even if the decision had been against Mr. Ruto and Mr. Sang. It would only have meant that they go to the defense phase. Now, but it's not an acquittal either. It's a discharge, more or less what we have in our own statutes, what we call Section 87A, where there is the possibility of re-prosecution. And in fact, the court was emphatic about that there could be re-prosecution either at the ICC or in a national jurisdiction. Now, the legal principle is that reparations, as opposed to assistance, and I will mention that under the Trust Fund for Victims, there is what we call the reparations mandate and also the assistance mandate. The reparations mandate it kicks in when there is a conviction. So it cannot, in a sense, kick in right now. But it's a legal argument as to, does that mean then that it doesn't kick in two situations, that is either a discharge or an acquittal? Right now we are neither in an acquittal nor in a conviction. So the way to progress this forward is then to pitch for the assistance mandate, which is applicable whether there is a conviction or not, and see what form of assistance the Trust Fund for Victims may be in a position to do. But as I said, it is an independent body, and it would have its own criteria for.
So who is supposed to initiate that? Is it you, or is it
yes, in fact, in the decision, the court invited us to look at what may be done with a view to securing either reparations, which in my view might not be applicable in this situation, or assistance in lieu of reparations. So that is something that we will certainly be taking up.
Let's finish with this side of the panel before we come to you, Dr. Singwe. You wanted to say something, Ms. Nyarango?
Yes, I wanted to just add that another area that we need to focus on is the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation report that has been pending before Parliament for years now. I don't agree with Mr. Nderito that we need to reevaluate and to have another commission. I think we need to adopt and implement the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation report fully. Not to pick and choose elements that we want to implement. Like the other day during the State of the Nation address last year, the President picking and choosing certain elements of apologizing to the country that were part of the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation report. Last year in December, there was a debate in Parliament, and there was a promise by the Speaker that once Parliament reconvened, they would prioritize discussion on the Truth and Justice report. They reconvened in February. We haven't had anything. We've tried to ask and to push for that discussion to be held so that the report is adopted and then we implement, because it covers a wide range of issues, historical issues that would address some of the root causes that made us brought us here and made us have the post-election violence. So for me, a huge concern, and I don't agree with Dr. Singwe that we don't understand as a country, and even our politicians, I don't think it's a matter of time that we need to implement these things. It's usually political will for us. We fully understand the things that we accede to, the obligations we accede to. It's just that we lack political will to push things forward when we reach that point where we need to act.
Now that this case, I want to go back to you. Now that this case has ended in that kind of limbo, it's neither acquittal nor...
Can we just find out from Dr. Singwe first, what do you think needs to happen next?
You know, in a sense, I think the challenge of externalizing a problem, as we have done via the ICC, means that a lot of energy gets dissipated in addressing that problem rather than, you know, focusing on what you could do nationally to move things forward. You know, I think a lot has been done. We must start from that premise, just like I think Nderito, you know, and Stella both agree on. A lot has been done. You know, by the government in terms of the resettlement agenda. Government has allocated over 7.3 billion shillings over the last 7 years towards resettlement of victims of post-electoral violence. Okay, the government has an institutional framework for doing that. You know, the IDB board, you know, that inventories victims, you know, and agrees with them in terms of how people want to be compensated. And initially, the focus really was about taking people back to their land through Rudi Nyumbani initiatives, among others. But of late, that process has also evolved towards cash transfers, so that victims themselves actually choose how they want to be compensated. If they want land purchased for them, that will be done. But most of them actually do request for cash transfers, and those have taken place. Indeed, you're right. I mean, His Excellency the President in 2015 State of the Nation address apologized to the country. He took responsibility really for everything that has happened in the past, and that in our view is part of this process, the process of beginning to say we were wrong, you know, that we failed as a country and as a leadership, and that in itself is a process of healing. All right, the President went ahead to say, look, we're setting up a restorative justice fund. Okay, and it's a 3-year fund where we will invest about 10 billion shillings. Indeed, it's true. You know, the last budget allocated 3.4 billion shillings. But the mechanism, for advancing, that restorative justice process has not been put in place by Parliament. As you know, absent a mechanism, again, it becomes very difficult, because of transparency imperatives, for government actually to be able to disburse these resources. So I think now that this dust has settled, I think it behooves all of us to work together around a framework that is acceptable to everybody, in terms of ensuring that that restorative justice fund is put into effect. But I think more broadly for me, and I agree with Nderito, I think we need a conversation that cuts across the entire country in terms of what is really, what have we learned from this whole process. We need to demobilize, what I would call ICC entrepreneurs. that the ICC has actually created entrepreneurs out of this whole process. Our civil society used to be great, in terms of actually advancing citizens' agenda. But instead, I think we have a civil society that has become completely beholden, to an external institution, and forgotten that there are real issues, of development, of inequality, of all these issues that we need to address together, and so I believe that.
But that's a huge statement, given that we have one member of
and I think we can speak to that. I have no problem, going into that conversation as well, because from where I sit, what we have seen is that, there are people in civil society that began to view themselves in a fairly antagonistic relationship with the state, because why deal with your government, if you can talk with Ocampo? Why deal with your government if you can talk with Bensouda? These are entrepreneurs.
Hold on, why not single out those individuals? Because you tarnish a whole group of people.
I'm saying some elements of civil society.
Okay, now you have qualified that, but then you see, wouldn't the feeling from civil society, which I think the President in his State of the Nation address attempted to reframe, to recast as alternative society.
Indeed.
And so, because of the ICC process, we got into this antagonistic relationship between the government and civil society, regardless of whether different organizations had a stake in the ICC process. So do we see any sort of standing down of tensions between the government and civil society?
But that's what we're talking about. That's what we're saying. There is need to really demobilize, demobilize, this grouping and this dichotomy, because civil society, and the opposition, they are carriers of the same compact, as it were, as government of the day. And so we must begin to work together around a common compact on this matter.
So that's one thing. Have you spoken to your boss? I mean, he's been celebrating, and he has a right to celebrate. But in terms of the way forward, I'm sure you went through the scenarios. What does he think should happen?
I think His Excellency the President and my boss share the same views on this matter, and the President has already spoken to it. The real need for us to unite as a country, to build bridges, to reconcile, and to have this conversation in terms of what is best. That the issue of victimhood has also become an enterprise. Every day we hear of new victims. Hundreds get resettled today, 100 more emerge tomorrow. So again, when you create this kind of incentives where people expect pecuniary benefit, out of this kind of an issue, people adopt strategic behavior. And so again, we need to actually agree as a country, who are the real victims of this, and what can we do for them. And there is a sense in which communities can also begin to contribute towards this. Neighbors can say, look, our friend, our brother, our sister suffered because of this, and we can contribute something. So it's not just the state, actually. I think we can begin to reach out to each other, across the board, both at the state level and at the non-state level.
Yeah.
I think I would want to say one thing, that even as we reach out to each other as communities, leadership must be provided by the state. It has to start from there, and it cannot be said to be good leadership when you have a fund that is set up. We get into a full year cycle of another State of the Nation address, and there is no legislative framework around a fund like this. Particularly in a situation where over the last 1 year, every day in the headlines we're reading about monies being misappropriated here and there. It is very, very dangerous to have 3.4 billion out there that we do not know who would be responsible for what. We do not know, as things stand, whether that money is still there. What I'm saying is that the government must set the pace. It must be the one to come up with a framework. And remember, victims do not want to be given assistance 20, 30 years down the line. 8 years
thanks
already.
To the ICC, it has taken 6 years already.
The time that they have had to wait from 2007 is already far too long.
Absolutely.
They need assistance, and they need it now. So that framework needs to be set up right now. We cannot go into the communities when the state itself is not leading.
So in terms of a tangible outcome, since you're agreeing, sorry Mutegi, since you're agreeing on this need for information, can we expect that the Office of the Deputy President will look into this issue of compensation and the frameworks that need to be established in order for all victims to access compensation? Is that something that...
I think we can totally expect the government, you know, to focus its energies on this matter.
The Deputy President championing certain initiatives. Can we see that? And he is a hard worker. And so we know that if he commits to doing this, it will get done.
I think you know, like you've seen him on the resettlement agenda, for example, you know, taking leadership of that matter. I think you will see him speaking more to this issue and actually taking action.
But I want to emphasize that we need to move away from just the resettlement agenda. The TJRC report had a reparations framework, very specific, with immediate, medium-term and long-term reparations that were needed for all categories of victims. I think we need to have a proper framework so that we stop this piecemeal implementation of the reparations framework. It needs to be adopted. That institution that needs to be implementing the 10 billion fund needs to be set up urgently and needs to take up that agenda holistically.
Thank you.
But I also want to respond to the allegations that have been made against civil society over here. And it's not the first time. I mean, previous regimes, previous government, even in the Moi regime, we've seen a lot of backlash against civil society. So it's nothing new. We receive it, and what I would want to say is, it is easy to pinpoint and to say civil society was doing the wrong thing, but we've remained consistent as civil society from the point of the post-election violence, in terms of even in trying to push for the mediation process, trying to push to ensure accountability along the way when the commissions were set up, trying to push to ensure that we never go back to the brink that we found ourselves in 2007. It is nothing new. There is nothing wrong with supporting the ICC process. It was an accountability process. However, it has gone. We've also supported national efforts. The DPP, we have pushed and pushed for national prosecutions. We have not only supported the ICC process, we've supported also national processes. I've been to the AG's office trying to push for action at a national level, for action, for us to be seen as a country to be moving forward also. And so when we receive all these allegations, particularly from a government that has also invested heavily in ensuring that accountability is not realized in this country, we receive them, but we will never stop doing what is right.
They're lobbing insults against each other, you know.
Yes.
You know, so I think it's
not against each other
now.
Let me ask a question which I wanted to ask years ago. Now that this case has ended the way it has ended, we had the Attorney General saying yesterday that the judiciary set up an international crimes section. We have seen that case ending in limbo, as I said before. Have we learned any lesson at all? Have their politicians learned any lesson at all, to the extent that when we go to elections from this year to next year, we will not see worse situation than 2007, 2008? Because people will say, you can meddle, you can interfere, and you get away with it. What do you see happening?
I think, first of all, for us to be able to move properly forward, we need, and by we I mean now government needs to disabuse itself of this notion that civil society is evil society. What I'm saying is this, that we in civil society and government do not need to agree on the approach to be taken, but government needs to listen to civil society. And I say this because I remain part of civil society myself. In 2008 January, ICJ Kenya, where Stella is and where I was chair at the time, was the first one that in the mediation process even suggested the question of power sharing. And that power sharing is what saved us from completely degenerating into civil war, in my view. Again, in 2009, ICJ Kenya was a very, very fast organization to say we are supporting a local tribunal. Now, the same ICJ Kenya and other civil society organizations are being vilified for having done what political players have belatedly come to recognize might have been the better bet. Although now, perhaps between yesterday, 5:45 in the evening, and now, perhaps they're saying that the ICC was the better bet. I don't know.
But now, we don't have to believe that point, because we know from '92, we couldn't have had multipartism without civil society. Anybody making noise about civil society must be sick. Because without civil society, this country would be still single party.
Yes.
Well, but that's why we are saying, as government, that civil society needs to go back to that place where it actually, in our view, cared for this country.
But the government will never see that, because you are
government will always appreciate that. It appreciates the role that private sector plays, and that is any voice outside government is civil society. It appreciates the role that churches play, etc., etc.
But you have seen this government trying to curtail the movement and the financing of civil society. They went to parliament and said you can only get 50%.
Nothing.
We know this government is not pro civil society, so there are no pretense about it.
Nothing could be farther from the truth.
Let me just add one small bit where you're talking about the International Criminal Division of the High Court. That is an idea that has been there for a number of years now, but at some point it was killed by government. There is a report on it regarding its establishment, but it was never established. It did not have to take the decision yesterday to put in place an international crimes division of the High Court. So I am really saddened that this is the time that the principal advisor, a legal advisor of government, the Attorney General, would come up and say that now it is good that the Chief Justice has said that this will be established within the next 2 weeks. That should have been done a long time ago. On top of that, again, the Attorney General says that we are going to re-energize our efforts towards resettlement of internally displaced persons and towards compensation for victims. That ought to have been an ongoing process, quite independently of the case of the ICC.
So my worry was to you, what will happen next year? Do we expect that there will be peace?
We have to answer that question when we come back from this break. This is Cheche. We're live on Citizen TV discussing the ICC verdict terminating the cases against the Deputy President William Ruto and the journalist Joshua Arap Sang. If you want to give us your thoughts, our SMS number is 22422, and you can tweet us using the hashtag Cheche.